I want to remind you that a parable is a story that is told that it underlies a spiritual truth. And typically, Jesus' parables all had to do with the kingdom, with salvation. And I think by now that we've looked at the shortest parable, we've looked at the longest parable, the most prophetic parable, possibly the most meaningful parable to me, and hopefully from the 40 parables of Jesus, you have a favorite parable. And I hope that I hit on that parable. We're going to close the series out on this parable of Jesus. R.C. Sproul said this about one of those most misunderstood parables. When we did the parable of the 10 virgins and then we went into the parable of the 10 talents, typically the most misunderstood parable was that. Jesus would make reference to it often. He would say, "For unto us and to everyone that it shall be given, and he shall have an abundance. But him that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be a weeping and a gnashing of teeth. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all the nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And so there's a consistency in those parables as they run together. And we spent 3 weeks on a parable that I believe was probably the most prophetic of all the parables. And then, of course, this particular parable, the one of the talents, it has to do with investment in eternity. You need to invest wisely. And so we taught you from that parable. We mentioned, I believe, when we were doing the series on the kingdom, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And so there's a lot of people that feel like that just as you should be prepared when the Lord comes back, just as you should be prepared by investing in eternity, because we don't know the hour, we don't know the day, we don't know the month, we don't know the year. But then I got to thinking about something else. You probably, for the most part, don't know the month, you don't know the hour, you don't know the year in which you will die. And yet, we should be prepared. And so a very profitable, I believe, a very profitable parable. But I don't believe that it's necessarily the last parable. Now, there are those that would probably disagree with me about what I'm going to do, and that's okay. I think that we ought to be prepared as believers. As Christians, we should be prepared. And in my vast experience of 47 years, and I don't say that in jest, I've tried to find any and every way that I could ask people about their eternal home. One of the ways, there are 2 questions that I use quite often. Maybe you might have used these also. They come from my evangelism explosion background, whether it's Christian witness training or Bill Bright's 4 spiritual laws or whatever it may be. There needs to be a way in which we talk to people about Jesus. And so one of the questions that we ask is, if you were to die today, do you know that you would go to heaven? And then we usually follow that up with the second question. If you were to die today and you were to stand before God the Father, and he should say to you, "Why should I let you into my heaven?" what would you say? Now, before you incriminate yourself, I'm going to read you a story. I think that most of us, in some way or another, that know Jesus, we may give a testimony. We may start out with the word I. I received. I was saved. But there are so many people that start out with, I hope. I'm trying to do my best. They interviewed the great one. Anybody know who that is? It dates me. Anybody know who the great one is? It's Jackie Gleason. I dated myself, didn't I? They interviewed him. They said, do you believe in heaven? He said, I hope. I hope that there's a heaven. But if there's a heaven, then that would mean there must be a hell. And so they asked him, well, what do you think about hell? He said, well, I don't think God would send anybody to hell for one little sin. And the interview took a comic turn, as you might think, from there. But you know, there's really not anything funny about that. There are a lot of people that are hung up on the idea of eternity. And you know, if you're going to spend most of your life in it, you probably ought to know a little bit about it. And so I'm going to read a story. And I'm going to preface this story by saying that I realize that I've been saved by grace through faith, that it wasn't anything that was about me, and it wasn't of works. It was by the grace of God. And I think most of us that know the Lord, we would concur. We would believe that. We would say that. That's not a problem. But I'm going to read to you something that I was going to paraphrase it, but I think we've got the time, I believe. And I believe that I need to read it in its entirety, because I believe that therein lies the answer to the question. It's in Luke chapter 23. In Luke chapter 23, I'm going to start reading in verse 26. I'm thankful that we sang about the cross today, that we sang about the blood, because that's right where we are. Verse 26 of chapter 23. As they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bear, the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Now I'm going to take that part, and I'm going to try to convince you that it's more than a proverbial saying. It's a continuation of a parable. And there were also two other malefactors led with him. I don't know if you realize that, but they were being led away with him. They were led away to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, we sang about that, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment, and they cast lots. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself. If he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. Now pay close attention. One of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, "If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? We indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss." And he said unto Jesus, "Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." And Jesus said unto him, "Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise." I thought about that. I thought about that at length. I thought about the Friday night that I asked Jesus to save me. I thought about that next Sunday when I came to the preacher and I said, "Hey, I got saved Friday night. When am I going to get baptized?" And like most preachers, most pastors, he wanted to make sure that I got it right. So he took me down the Romans road, and I answered the questions. He took me down the Soul Winner's Guide, and I answered the questions. He took me down the Bill Bright's 4 Spiritual Laws, and I answered the question. And finally, he got around to saying, "How do you know that you're saved?" Because he said so. That's it. That's the answer. Because he said so. Think about it. Here's this thief on a cross. You think that there was time for him to say, "Now, do you understand the doctrine of justification?" I don't think so. Well, how about the doctrine of baptism? Do you understand that? No. Do you understand the theanthropic nature and the hypostatic union of Jesus, of myself? No. When he stood before God, all that would be necessary is, how do you know that you should be here? He said so. He said so. And we've learned in our Bible that God preserves his saints forever. And so if the thief on the cross were to be asked those 2 questions, I don't know that he would have any other response other than because he said so. John chapter 1 and verse 12 says, "But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, especially to them that believe upon his name." How do you know that you're saved? Because he said so. It's nothing to do with you. You might say, "Well, I received him on such and such day. I repented of my sin." You could say any and every of those things, and those are not wrong. But the main idea that I need for you to grasp from this particular passage, we're saved because he said so. That ought to stop those alarmists and those Arminians and all those people that they go from one day to the next not knowing if they're saved or not. Now, don't say, because he said so, if you haven't repented, if you haven't received him. But that in and of itself is a good enough reason, because he said so. And so just before his crucifixion, I want us to consider something else. Luke shares a perspective with us that the other Gospels do not. While on the road, while on the path to his crucifixion, there were several people present. We know from the Scriptures that the Sanhedrin was present. We know that there were those rulers that had taken him and they had put him in a mock trial. And as they brought him before the Roman governor, and as they tried to convince Pilate, "Look, this man says he's the king of the Jews. We only have one king, and that's Caesar." Pilate repeatedly said, "I find no fault with this man. How about I release unto you, as was the custom? How about I release him unto you?" So we know that there were premeditated murderers in that crowd. You know who's conspicuously absent? The disciples. Where were they? We find at the cross, John was there, his mother, Mary, but they were strangely absent from that crowd. Not everyone in that crowd hated Jesus. In fact, we're going to find by looking at that verse from verse 26 on through verse 32, we're going to find out that there were some people that were mourning him. Now, a lot of people, a lot of scholars, they have a problem with this. They might at best look at it as a proverbial saying, but I don't see it that way. Now, you can decide after I'm finished. First of all, they grabbed someone out of that crowd as they followed Jesus going to that place of crucifixion, a fellow by the name of Simon. You know what I found out about that guy? He wasn't just unlucky. He was more than likely from North Africa. He was a Jew, and he was there for Passover. And from all the people in that crowd, in God's sovereignty, they pulled him out of the crowd to carry the cross of Jesus the rest of the way. Do you know what I found out about that guy? In Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 11, he became a believer. That some of those preachers that were sent out from Cyrene were more than likely. He was one of them, and they even give his sons as a point of reference. So it wasn't accidentally. There was purpose in even the man that carried the cross. So there they followed him, this mixed bag of mourners and sympathetic. And by the way, I need to say this right now. I believe it was while we were studying the kingdom. You can be sympathetic to Jesus. You can join the crowd. You don't have to be the ones that cry out, crucify him, crucify him. We know that it was our sin that put him on the cross in the first place. But that won't cut it. At the end of the day, the sympathetic crowd is just as lost as the murderers, as those that premeditated his demise. What I found interesting was this little discourse that Jesus gave. Now, for me to just simply go through everything that he had suffered up to this point, most of the time, we pastors, teachers, we all see it the same way. He suffered greatly. Our sin was put upon him. He became sin for us, he who knew no sin. And we try to do our best to try to explain that, the cat of nine tails, and how many times he was scourged, and at least twice. A lot of men couldn't suffer it one time. He suffered through it twice. They put a crown of thorns on his head. He was beaten, battered, and bruised. They spit upon him. And we look at him as a victim. But I want you to see something. He did not look at himself as a victim. So, let's reread that. Because Luke, in his sharing of this with us, I think he points out something that is of particular interest as we close out these parables. So there followed a great company of people with him, women which were bewailed, and they lamented him. Do you know who they were? It doesn't say who they were particularly, but I can tell you who they were. They were professional mourners. You see, no Jew, no matter how bad the crime, should be put to death by a Roman soldier and not have somebody cry over it. So these women are weeping, daughters of Jerusalem. It's an Old Testament phrase. It just simply means that they are very familiar with Jerusalem. Many of them probably were born there, raised there. And so in that crowd, there were probably sympathetic people. There were people that mourned him. Did you know, and I got this from another guy, I can't claim credit. I can find, you ladies ought to sit up, I find no place anywhere in the Gospels that a woman ever mistreated Jesus. Ching. That won't get you to heaven, by the way. But the men did. And so here, when this man that we now know will later become a believer carries this cross, he stops and he speaks to that crowd. The first thing that he says is, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me." I'm not the victim here. Weep for yourselves and your children. Now, can you imagine that? On his way to the cross, and he doesn't see himself as a victim. The reason is because before, in the preordinate counsel of God, they had already determined that Jesus must needs come and die. No man takes his life from him. He gave it up. And so he says to these mourners, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves. I think that's important because what it does is it points back to something. 2 thieves were led away with him, verse 32. That's what we find out. So as they were led away with him, there are those in that crowd. Remember, this is Friday. Remember, we spent 3 weeks on that parable that he spoke on Wednesday. You remember the parable of the vineyard? Well, I want you to hold on because this is what I believe is a continuation of that parable. Weep not for me. Weep for yourselves. Weep for your children. Verse 29, for behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck. What's he talking about? He's talking about a judgment that will come. Do you remember what those men that were present when he gave the parable there about the vineyard? Do you remember what the conclusion that they came up with? What should be done to these men that take God's beloved or the vineyard, the one that owned the vineyard? What should be done with the men that put him to death? Premeditated. Do you not see that Friday was a premeditation of something that they'd already determined to do in their heart? And that was kill him. And so Jesus is simply saying this. He's saying, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and weep for your children. Verse 29 is a reference to a particular section of the Bible. It's a command, by the way. Stop weeping. Stop weeping for me. Weep for yourselves. I want to flip over to Luke chapter 19 just for a moment. Luke chapter 19. You remember when he said this? When he was come near, he beheld the city and he wept over it. What city? Jerusalem. Saying, if thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come upon thee, and thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. And then he went to the temple and he began to cast them out. You say, well, why is that so important? Well, just turn the page over to Luke 21. It kind of sets up where I'm going with this. Take me a while to get there, but then I'll finish rather rapidly. Look at verse 20. When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be a great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now go back to chapter 23. Here's what he's saying. And he takes the saying from Hosea, because Hosea was able to see the same thing prophetically. Hosea chapter 10. And I'm going to read verse 8. The high places also of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorn and the thistle shall come up on their altars, and they shall say unto the mountains, cover us up, and to the hills, fall on us. O Israel, thou hast sinned. Here's what Jesus is saying back in chapter 23. And I want to just call it to your attention. Now this is me calling it to your attention. He's not saying it. It would have been nice if he would have just point blank referred back to that parable, but he's not. He doesn't need to. He's saying there's a day coming when the owner of the vineyard, there's a day coming when the owner of the vineyard brings judgment upon the keepers of the vineyard. And remember I told you that prophetic parable would be realized in the next few days? Well, we're there. We are there. He's walking up the hill on the way to his death, and he turns to these mourners, and he says, stop weeping for me. Weep for yourselves, because judgment is coming. The owner of the vineyard is coming to enact judgment upon Israel. Now, what did we learn from our history? That Titus, the general of the Roman armies, would invade Jerusalem in 66 AD. There would be several that would invade. Josephus records I thought about the number of holocausts that the Jews have been through. Remember in 722 BC when the Assyrians, they took Israel by storm and they led them away captive. You remember that? Remember Jonah had such a hard time going to Assyria because of the way that they treated God's people? They would take and they would destroy, and they would take the bodies of their victims and they would bleach their skulls in the sun, and they would stack them outside of the entrance to their cities. And so Jonah, when he's called to go into Nineveh, he goes, no, not going there. Not going to do it. And we know he winds up there anyway. That there was a great Holocaust there. There's a great Holocaust in 70 AD. Josephus records that over 1 million Jews were killed from 66 AD to 70 AD. In one day, as many as 500,000. They would take babies from their mothers, and they would swing by their feet and bash their heads up against the stones. It was a massacre. And Jesus is making reference to that. There will be a day when you say, come and fall upon us, mountain. It would be better that you weren't born. It would be better that you had no children. It would be better that you were not pregnant when that happens. And that's a direct reference to what? the parable of just a few days before. Except the owner of the vineyard is coming to enact judgment. I remember another Holocaust, the one that gets most of the attention. The Jews have been scattered and maligned, and they have been beaten and bruised for centuries, until one day they began to return home. And so our messages on the kingdom is a principle that's based not just on the loose sayings of a couple eschatologists. Your whole Bible is pointing towards this kingdom. But you cannot have the kingdom. Somebody said that you can't have rain without the mud. Well, you're not going to have the kingdom without the judgment. Now, there's a greater judgment that Zechariah speaks of, and that will happen during the tribulation. But this is happening in just the near future. So that's why Jesus, as he walks to his death, turns to those mourners, and he says, quit weeping for me. You need to weep for yourselves, because vengeance is coming. And it did come. It also is in Revelation chapter 6, when the sixth seal is broken. During the tribulation, there will be another Holocaust. And the world will sit underneath that judgment. So he goes on to say, then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, to the hills, cover us. And here is the rest of the parable. Some say that it's a proverbial saying. It's like I believe it was Jeremiah. He said, if you faint in the day of the foot soldier, what are you going to do when they send in the cavalry? Well, that's a proverbial saying. But I still see it as a parable. And you can take your pick as to what you want to do with it. But here it is. You tell me. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Let me help you with the interpretation. Who's the green tree? Jesus, the miracle worker, the Son of God. A fruitful time of ministry that many of these people witnessed, and yet they're torn between, is this the Messiah? Even on the way to the cross, there were people that thought any minute now, he's going to reveal himself. He's looking for a phone booth. He's Superman. He's the Messiah. He's a superhero. But that didn't happen, did it? In fact, that whole week, they're waiting for him to be Messiah. And what does he do? He goes into the temple, he throws out the money changers, and then he speaks to the scribes and the Pharisees in such a way that he says, you're the problem. Well, there are a few holdouts, all the way right up to the point where he is put on a tree. They're waiting for him to come down. In fact, they mock him with that saying. So the green tree is Jesus. It's a profitable, a fruitful time. If you do this to the green tree, what are you going to do? What shall be done in the dry? Now, who's the dry? Israel. Israel is the dry. And it's a direct reference, I believe, back to that prophetic parable that you now see realized. The gospel is being realized. And he's not the Messiah that they looked for, but he's the Messiah of the Bible. And on his way to his death, he stops long enough to let them know, you shouldn't be crying for me. You ought to be crying for yourself. Because when they were invaded, it was a Holocaust, and they were scattered. The temple was completely ruined. And he talked of this in Matthew 24 and 25. He told the disciples what was going to happen. And so this is the fruition of, I believe, that parable. The gospel is being realized. He's going to go to a cross. He's going to die for the sins of mankind. And they're going to bury him. And on the third day, he's going to rise. And all who will believe in him, that he's the only begotten Son of God. And I think the operative word, once again, is when they hear the gospel, when they see these people were able to actually witness the gospel, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And then the good news, he no more gets on the cross, and these two thieves start in. The one, why don't you just save yourself? If you're the Christ, save yourself and us. The other thief, shut up, man. We get what we deserve. This man has done nothing. Lord, now, I cannot do what Jesus can do, and neither can you. I cannot look into the heart of people and know what they feel and what they think. I can say this and say it with a surety. After 47 years, I haven't gotten any better at it. I'm not. You can fake me out. You can fake me out. But you can't fake God out. And so Jesus, on his way to this cross, takes the time to look at that malefactor and says, today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Why was the thief on the cross assured of heaven? Because he said so. Let me ask you that question. If you were to die today, do you know that you will go to heaven? And if you were to die and you were to stand before God and he were to say, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say? I hope you can say, because he said so. That preacher friend of mine drilled me pretty good. But when it got right down to it, the only thing I knew to say is, because he said so. He said so. Lord, I pray that this morning as we look at this, I believe the final parable, that it's a realization that the gospel is true. For some of the people there, they would see him as Messiah. But for the majority, they would cry out, crucify him, and they would make mockery and fun of him. And yet, Lord, in what we look as a great tragedy, he sees as being triumphant. Lord, I pray that as we've looked on the parables, I pray that we see the salvation message through all of them. I pray that even in this pronunciation of judgment, there's an opportunity for someone to be saved, an opportunity for someone to hear the gospel, an opportunity for someone to say, today, I'm going to call out in faith. I'm going to repent of my sin, and I'm going to turn to God's Son, Jesus. I see that there is no other name given among men whereby we must be saved, but that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. The operative word for that thief was Lord. And Jesus saw into his heart. Lord, I pray for those this morning that might maybe hear the gospel for the first time. They might call out in faith and they say, yes, Lord. Yes, I believe. I trust in you, and I trust in you alone for my salvation. I turn from my sin and I turn to you. And I pray that, Lord, that we have people that are in the wings just waiting to be saved. Help us to be adventurous enough to talk to them about Jesus. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.